Hey, everybody, welcome to Defender Fridays. So, you might notice my background's a little different than usual. It's because we are coming to you live from B-Sides Austin right now. That's actually
Oh,
where that's actually where I am, Whitney is, and our guest, Michael Robertson, and a few of our other our guests are also coming in from the event here. So, hopefully the background noise is as chill as it can be. But let's go ahead and dive into this thing. So, this week we've got on a special guest, Michael Robertson, who is a security analyst for Recon InfoSec, which, is many of you know, it's kind of near and dear to my heart for a lot of reasons. Michael just gave his first workshop actually at B-Sides yesterday, which was super cool. And it was effectively just email threat hunting and kind of detection in email, which is a topic I think doesn't get enough love personally because it's not sexy. It's been around for a really long time, right? Like email is ancient, right? And so it's not like the cool thing to talk about. It's and a lot of the technology things that the technologies that exist for it are kind of commoditized, right? Like everybody knows, like I just go get a proof point or a Cisco ESA, which I don't recommend, but like nobody's really talking about like cutting edge techniques in getting their arms around reducing the attack surface of emails for enterprise, which is hilarious to me because Michael, I'm curious to hear your take on this, but I would bet the overwhelming majority of attack surface that most enterprises face is all email related, right? But it's the thing I think that we talk the least about and that we focus the least on, right? I don't know if your thoughts are aligned there, but yeah. So Michael, would love to hear your thoughts on this, man, and maybe get a couple of snippets from the workshop that you ran because it was pretty hands on, pretty exciting stuff.
yeah. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, I just gave the talk yesterday, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. I'll drop to GitHub. It's a good resource if anyone's interested in learning Sublime. As far as your question, yeah, exactly right. Like I think on the endpoint side, and even to a good extent the cloud side, there's sort of a level of maturity there of analysis and sort of like thinking about the problem that doesn't exist for email, which is kind of funny because like email, like you said, has been around forever. So it's like, how do we do email securely? So like somehow we still don't have good answers for these questions. I think Sublime is like really the first attempt at like trying to do that in a way that is like free to low cost, sort of like in an open source type of model that's like easily accessible, right? Like for sort of smaller organizations, less than 100 users, like you can spin up a managed instance where you don't do anything, right? You can just plug it in. If you want to roll your own, you can do that 100% for free as well, up to unlimited users if you roll it into like an Azure VM. So super, super approachable, and it just gives you the ability to be sort of as um, detail oriented and finite on writing and crafting detection queries with email the same way that you could do with like Sigma or something on the endpoint side.
Right. Like, so you just kind of nailed one of my favorite parts about it. And real quick, before I even say that, because it's starting to sound like, man, we're getting really lovey-dovey right now about some product, some vendor. But I think a lot of the folks that have been on this, just that have joined us for Defender Enterprise know that like we're not here to like just like pitch crap and then market and advertise for anybody, even ourselves, right? Lima Charlie, you don't hear a whole lot about Lima Charlie, though the Lima Charlie team is behind this, but that's because it's intentional. Like we're not here to shill for vendors, but there are exceptions for that. And personally, one of my exceptions that I will happily shill is when there's an overwhelmingly generous free tier related to the product, where it's like practitioners that are trying to learn or small businesses that can't just go and splurge on a $50,000 solution can deploy it and it's 100% free. Like those are ones I can get behind. And so I will happily talk about Sublime for all the same reasons that you just mentioned. But one of the coolest things I think about them as well is their detection as code approach, right? Like they were kind of one of the first email security solutions that I know of that are very all in on detection as code. Robertson, right? Is that kind of true with your understanding of it?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's like the basis of the product, and talking about the free tier is like huge. I don't like I want to get this across to people. There is zero difference between the paid version and the free version for threat hunting. So like, let's say you have other filtering gateways, you have other sort of email appliances that, you know, your team is happy using, right? Like maybe it's Proofpoint, maybe it's Mimecast, maybe you have it dialed to the nines, maybe it's working well for you. But can you do the sort of threat hunting that you are able to do in Sublime? Maybe. I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. I would argue no, just from having experience dealing with like Mimecast and Proofpoint consoles. So it's just also just really easy, right? Like plug it in, it's ingesting in the background. Like I said, if you know you're concerned about like third party having access to your email or storing emails offsite, you don't want to do that. Like spin it up on your own. Throw a Docker at it for 600 mailboxes, or again, you could spin it up in Azure for unlimited mailboxes, right? So, yeah, I see some chat in or some sort of stuff in the chat about abnormal. I If anyone has like access to abnormal and will show it to me, I would love to look at it. My understanding and sort of my viewpoint is like I like Sublime's approach more than Abnormal's approach for the same reason that I like Sigma HQ over Splunk, right? I think when you have like this huge sort of global cohort and different teams like working towards like making detections for different threats, you're gonna be much better in the end than sort of just like one team. Even if the team has like, I don't know, like some omnipresent AI, right? Like maybe I don't know if you throw enough GPUs at it, it might work eventually. But like also you got to have people like tuning those, and then the feedback just isn't there immediately. Like let's
Right.
say you want to do like a tune or you want to do like a threat hunt. What does that look like if you're not doing the work? Like, do you just put in a ticket and pray? Like, I don't know. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know anyone that has like really used abnormal for a long time to talk to them. I would be super interested to talk to anyone that's using abnormal.
So, so Michael, something I think that folks that attend this call would probably get some value out of is you release some kind of guided labs, like some hands-on sort of practice labs that allow you to kind of spin up those free resources to do some digging. Can you kind of walk us through one of those? Like just kind of talk to sort of the tools that are available. And again, these are all free, like right. So this isn't a pitch. Like it's like this is free stuff you can add to your analyst workflow. But
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think for folks that have never seen it before, show us the magic, man.
Yeah. Let's go through a couple examples. It makes sense. Let's see if I can share my screen back again. All right, here's the GitHub that I dropped in the chat a little bit, and like Eric said, this sort of covers everything from top to bottom. So if you read this from top to bottom, you could go from not hunting with Sublime to hunting with Sublime in a day, easily in a day, probably within an hour or two. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, though, there's the examples, and they're sort of iterative. So once you drop down the hint in the solution for one question, it'll move to the next. It's not the most elegant solution, but it's the solution that I came up with for this lab. But then there's samples for each one of these. So let's see if we just pulled up like a good example would be like the OneNote one. Let's see. Okay, so I don't know if you guys remember a while back, there was a bunch of stuff for OneNote files being sent maliciously through email. There should be no good reason that you're sending OneNote files through email. So block OneNote files through email. But if you weren't blocking OneNote files for email and you're wondering, hey, has anyone in my organization gotten OneNote files ever, right? What you can do is then use Sublime to just go back and hunt through the email boxes for all those users and look, has anyone sent OneDrive files, right? So like all I can do is like, I'm going to pull this example email over to this MQL logic, right? Which again is like this detection as code that we're talking about. And then I can test it, right? Okay, this flags. Okay, what I'm doing is I'm literally just looking for the file extension being one of these. In this case, it's this one package file, or the presence of this OneNote file being inside of a zip file, right? And then if I jump over to what can I not share? What if I just do this entire screen? Can you
Ballsy
guys
move.
see? Can you see this
Yes.
Firefox?
Hang on, you're shifting. There you go. Yeah, it's up.
Okay, so basically, then in the Sublime console, right, which is like this, the Sublime UI, which has a full API, by the way. So if there's not a more like awesome way that you can use this tool, like, and it's free, and it has like great API where you could ship out all the functions, I don't know. It's great. But anyway, you can go to the hunt here, right? And then I pre-populate a hunt, and then I'm looking back 30 days. Has this behavior been exhibited? Oh, look, we found another example of this being sent, like a different OneNote file. So this is kind of what you can do, right? Like you can be as complex or sort of as iterative on these like pieces of code that you're looking at. And then you can use Yara, right? So like this is great because like as security practitioners, like we probably already have a huge stack of Yara rules. I think for our email customers, we're running close to like 18,000 different Yara rules, right? Like looking for the presence of those type of files like inside of attachments or inside of like auto downloaded attachments that are linked out from email, right? So that's also super powerful. I'll just show quickly the second example. Did this switch back over when I moved?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
just kind of
perfect.
slow, but yeah, it just switched.
If we look at this last example on the workshop, which is example 7, this is sort of the whole process in action, right? So how can you get good threat intel to perform email threat hunts? One of two ways in my sort of limited experience. One is like threat intel feeds, whether those are public, whether it's like OS int of you finding stuff, whether it's like you just going to any run and pulling down samples, or like Joe Sandbox and pulling down samples, et cetera, et cetera. And then the second would be user reports. So I think user reports are probably more important because those are actually the threats that are hitting your environment, and sort of using
1000%.
those to build detection queries, and then building rules based off those. But so here is a 0-day that was in Microsoft Office. Basically, what happens is like if there's a corrupted file, any of the Office macro extensions, so docx, xlsx, pptx, or whatever the PowerPoint one is,
Yeah.
they'll try to like autocorrect when it opens. And there's a way you can corrupt it like very easily to where it can always repair itself. Okay, which is sort of what they're describing here. And then Bleeping Computer also sort of came out with an article on it that sort of covered it very clearly. But you could also just see it, right? You go to the app any run. Here's the email, right? Again, this is all in the GitHub. That's the last example. If you wanted to sort of explore it after this, but basically what happens is they open this docx and then immediately get prompted if they want to repair the file. We found unreadable content in this file. Do you want to recover the contents? But because it's sort of in a broken state until it fixes it, it completely evades any sort of sandboxing, right? So anything that like Office 365 or Google Workspace would do to try to sandbox that file completely negates it, right? Because it can't open it in the sandbox in the way that it can do it here on App Any Run or Joe Sandbox or something, right? So anyway, you hit yes, and then bam, it's actually like the chain link phishing, which is what you see a lot of, right? So yeah, what they did is they sort of wrote this Yara rule that looks for this behavior, this specific sort of header corruption. And then bam, we can see like this detection rule that is now looking for this behavior inside of any of those Office macros. We'll just flag a high detection now. So this is the kind of stuff you can do, right? Like you can really, the world's your oyster on sort of building detections for email using Sublime. And you can use that for detection. You can use it for threat hunting. You can use it for filtering. It's really up to you.
Dude, that's epic. So effectively, you can just consume Yara sigs and use that not only for monitoring from today forward, but also retroactive hunts, which I want to go back to. You brought that up earlier, right? Like it's like, hey, so user reported a malicious email. Obviously the next thing we want to find out is, well, who else has a copy of this email, right? And that question varies in difficulty on answering it. Like it depends, like, are you buddies with the exchange team? You can just reach out and ask them, maybe they'll answer it for you, right? But if like you're in an organization that has a 300 person IT department, it may actually be nearly impossible to answer such a simple question like who else received this email in our organization without having access or scripting or something. And so the ability to have like inline retrieval and kind of retroactive, basically scoping is what it is phenomenal.
Let me flip that though a little bit. So I would argue like most people that are on this call have access to be able to like search mail relatively easily and pull back. Okay, like this is the sender, this is the email subject.
Yeah.
Who all did this go to? Like you can just message trace it, right? But more importantly, is the behaviors. Okay, so here's an example, right? Like not only who all got this email, but who all ever received messages with this technique. Like this is sort of the thing that's like more important, right? So here's an example, which is attachment with encrypted zip. But it's only because I attached the zip before I pulled the sample out, right? So anyway, it doesn't hit on any detections in the base analyzer, but we can look at what is happening here. This PDF contains a link out to an HTML phishing page, okay? Should PDFs redirect to HTML pages? It's probably somewhat rare, okay? But that would be a better thing to sort of know. If we look at this file in the sandbox, I pulled this down from Joe's sandbox, this PDF. Basically, eventually this will go to Cloudflare, which is classic. Okay, this is a way that they get around sandboxing is by having the CAPTCHA. And then I think this is probably taken down, but this was basically attacker in the middle phishing for Office 365. But what we can do is we can just write a detection that's looking for any PDF which contains a link that ends with one of these HTML flags, right? So basically, because this is a PDF linking out to that HTML file, and it has the machine language classifier, the machine language model basically thinks it's possible that this email contains a credential theft attempt, which it does. Those two things like basically make this an extremely high fidelity rule with low false positives, and we're not relying on did this match the other emails that are sent in the environment, but like does this technique match anything else that we've seen, right? So this is the kind of thing that you can do.
It's like the difference between using MD5s to find malware and using M hashes or using Jara, right? Like it's a more resilient detection technique when you're latching onto the more primitive techniques instead of like the exact subject or the exact sender, right? Which these things are throwaways, right? Like they will change. They absolutely change.
Yeah, 100%.
So that is phenomenal. Okay, Michael, I've got maybe one that's a little tougher for you, but I'm curious. Like, what about the abuse of legitimate services, right? Like that's rampant, right? Like using legit DocuSign to send, phishing, right? Like, how do organizations combat that? Because obviously, how do I detect what is an otherwise legitimate email just being used for illegitimate purposes? Any tips there?
It's hard. I think as much as you can standardize your org on, we use DocuSign, you should never get a HelloSign link, or vice versa. We use HelloSign, you should never get a DocuSign link. And even writing detections to block those, because a lot of times what happens is, so I'll give you an example, which is like Dropbox has these links called SCL links, smart control links or something. I forget what it stands for. But long story short, they're permission restricted, right? So as a sandbox or even as like an analyst, me going to like analyze a link to determine is this legitimate before I like release a message, we can't tell, right? And so the same thing happens with SharePoint links quite commonly. So specifically personal SharePoint links. So if you see my dash SharePoint, even intra org, right? So like it could be my dash SharePoint in the in the organization's SharePoint. But if that person is the victim of business email compromise and their account's taken over, and then the
Right.
attacker creates a document in their personal and then shares it with all the recipients,
Hmm.
I can't then use my account to go open it because I wasn't sent the file.
Right.
Um, those are increasingly hard. The best way that we deal with those is sort of applying warning banners and then also
Yep.
sort of training the users. Like
Right.
if you see this warning banner and this warning text that says the security team, can't inspect this,
Right.
um, then sort of be on your guard. But also, some of the time we can apply rules that are more aggressive to those based on reputation. So, for
Right.
instance, let's say we see one of these links that's sort of unviewable, but then also the person that sent the message has never sent an email to the org. We can quarantine that, right? Like
Yep.
the likelihood that someone sends sort of a personal SharePoint link or like a DocuSign and they've never talked to your organization, quite low, right? And in the case that like those are legitimate, which it does happen, but it's like, yeah, that happens like once every 6 months. Like we shouldn't base the rest of our security policy on being insecure because like one email might get blocked every 6 months.
I love that. Yeah, that was something you said yesterday that really resonated with me. It's understanding what is the prevalence of a thing. And if it's an extremely rare occurrence, then I think it's acceptable to insert some friction there, right? Like if we end up quarantining one or two or three emails a quarter because of this new aggressive rule, that's fine. But you have to be careful not to ever end up on the other side of that, where because I've talked to an org that was trying to get their arms around the DocuSign phishing issue, and so they started quarantining all DocuSigns, and that pissed off the business real fast, right? Because now, executives are waiting on a DocuSign and it's not here. They're looking in their inbox. It's not here. Where is it? I know it was sent to me. And it's because the security team is having a clear quarantine. And so there's definitely a balance, I think, that has to be struck there. But I
Yeah.
agree with you. It's hard. Like this is not an easy
Mhm.
problem.
Yeah, they're definitely like getting wise. Sort of so this is more prevalent, like specifically like file sharing or like any kind of like collaboration type documents. Um, what we sort of saw before this happening a lot was attackers exploiting Microsoft encrypted mail. So what they would do is like every single message they sent would be just encrypted with the Microsoft stuff, and so only the end user could open it. It's again permission restricted. There
Oh
were
man.
there were ways to get around it, like, but it was tedious and like not automatable, right? So that was quite tough. We haven't seen that. Like, sort of, I don't know if like the toolkits that are out now are using more of like the DocuSign and the share file stuff, but um, it's definitely less prevalent than it was even like 6 months to a year ago.
Michael, can the free Sublime Analyzer do OCR?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Does it
yeah.
do any
All the
OCR
OCR
of like,
stuff.
okay, oh,
Yeah, so it can do a
epic,
message screenshot.
epic.
So
That's
this is
super
like
cool, man.
uh yeah, all the machine language identifiers can be ran against the message screenshot. So it'll go out and take a screenshot of the page, but also any documents, right? So you can run those classifiers like, and you can write more aggressive rules based on those, right? So it's like, does the in the case where it's not a permission restricted DocuSign, which is like, I don't know, they're kind of half and half, right? But some of the phishing links are non-permission restricted, and then we have much better success with like just quarantining them and blocking them. But stuff you can look for on that kind of stuff, right, is like, is there a redirect after the initial thing is clicked on the page, right? So like, if there's an embedded link in an image in a DocuSign, and there's not actually any text there, that's like a very common way that like they try to phish you. Like you open a
Yep.
file and it's like, click here to open the file. It's like, I just opened the file. Um, but
The file is inside the file.
yeah, it's like file inception, which is like
Yes.
this new term that like people are using, called chain link phishing to describe this behavior where you sort of have like multi-page. Uh,
Uh,
it's not a redirect, right? Because it's requiring user input. So there's like redirects and open redirects, that are like redirecting the websites and stuff like this. But this is specifically like a page you're landing on. You click a button, takes you to a new page. Click a button, takes you to a new page. Like eventually you'll wind up like at the phishing page, which is usually attacker in the middle style phishing.
Wild. So when you say attacker in the middle, you're talking like that the kind of newish technique of having like a full proxy web session where you might be putting in OFA or MFA into an app, but it's being proxied by an attacker in the middle. Yeah. Now that's some scary stuff. And that's another one that I know a lot of like, forward-leaning orgs are trying to get their heads around. Dude, that is a really tough one to prevent. Detect. It kind of just boils down to user awareness, knowing that this is a thing, this is possible, or having phish resistant, like FIDO2 type credential, right? Something that is not going to get passed in through an evil Nginx or an RDP session, right? You mentioned that one yesterday, like RDP file, right? Is that a way that attackers are doing this? Pretty solid.
Yeah. One thing that is interesting that there isn't a lot you can do to combat like drive-by attacker in the middle phishing. We have seen sort of spear phishing, like more targeted type cloning of like website. So or like the not the website, like the splash page for the login. What you can do for that though is quite nice that we've started doing is like you basically have like a custom branding on the org's login page, and you can place in an obfuscated canary token. So basically, like anytime someone tries to like clone that site, you'll get a notification from the canary. So basically, then it's user education again. So basically, you educate the user, hey, you should never be prompted to log into anything because we have OAuth, unless it's like organization's custom branded web portal, which is redirecting to Office 365. And then you can sort of like, I mean, it's hard, right? Because like, of course, someone's just going to log in. But if they get redirected with attacker in the middle phishing to the default Office 365 page, like alarm bells should go off and flags should be like, this isn't the way I normally sign in, right? Anyway.
100%. For anybody that didn't catch that, so Thinks is another one of the companies we love to talk about because they fit the mold of like, I just dropped a link because I thought I did. Okay, yeah, my chat was delayed. So they expose a completely free service where you generate canaries. I think most folks are probably familiar with that. But one of those canaries is like the web token where you embed it in a website, and if somebody clones that site in order to replicate it so they can build like a phishing page, boom, you're going to get a call back because it's coming back from something that it doesn't usually come back from, like a different DNS record, right? So yeah, that's a super easy way. And you know who's doing stuff like this? And we learned it actually once. At Recon was Okta. Okta is basically doing this internally. Yeah, and we learned this when we had a pen test come in, and when the pen testers cloned the Okta login page, boom, Okta got notified. They knew that because they had a canary. And that was pretty slick. I dig it, man. So I do want to throw out a quick reminder for anybody that might have came in late. So Michael Robertson dropped a link to a GitHub where he's got some hands-on examples. If you've not spent much time doing some of the more like kind of cutting edge email analysis stuff, he's given several like sample emails with example like MQL, message query language, and like just hunts that you can run. Highly recommend checking out that GitHub. There's a link in the Slack if you missed it in the Zoom chat. But and again, with the free tier of Sublime, I can't promote that product enough because they make something so powerful immediately available to anybody that wants to play with it, and that's super legit. Like that's the way good business is done. But any parting thoughts, Michael? Anything that our enterprise defenders want to know to get their arms around email as a substantial threat vector?
Quick tip: block as many extensions as you can. You should really just try to block like every single file extension in email.
So basically move with more of an allow list instead of a block list, right? Like have it 100%. explicitly block other than these handful that have a good reasoning. I dig that, dude. I dig that a lot. All right, folks. Well, hey, that takes us to the top of the hour. If you're not already in the Slack, make sure you join slack.limacharlie.io. We'll announce a winner of a Defender Fridays t-shirt. every week like usual. Join us next week. We've actually got Maxime Librestard. Sorry, I just butchered that. From Lima Charlie, coming on next week to talk some pretty cool stuff. So you certainly want to be there for that. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and a great weekend. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
See ya.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Robotic.